Laura's footsteps echoed through the empty hallway of her apartment building. The worn-out carpet, threadbare from years of use, absorbed the muffled thuds of her heavy strides. Her mind was a storm of chaos and despair as she fumbled with her keys, her fingers trembling. She unlocked the door with an unsteady hand and stepped into her cluttered living room. The once cozy space now felt alien, suffocating under a weight of disarray. Piles of unopened mail, dirty dishes, and discarded clothes formed a jumbled mess that mirrored her internal turmoil. A gust of stale air greeted her, carrying with it the faint, lingering scent of spilled coffee and old regret. Laura slumped into the worn-out armchair that had seen better days. Her gaze drifted to the clock on the wall, its hands taunting her with the time she had missed. The crucial meeting with her lawyer, a meeting that could have changed everything, had slipped through her fingers like sand. The realization struck her like a physical blow, and a deep, anguished sigh escaped her lips. The phone buzzed on the table, a jarring intrusion into her solitude. She glanced at the screen and saw her lawyer's name flash. Her heart sank as she let the call go to voicemail, unable to face the inevitable disappointment and frustration that awaited her on the other end. With a weary groan, Laura dragged herself to the kitchen. She opened the cabinet, reaching for a half-empty bottle of wine she had been saving for a special occasion. She poured herself a glass, the deep red liquid swirling like a dark promise of numbness. As she took a sip, the bitter taste seemed to mirror her emotions, sharp, unrelenting, and deeply unsatisfying. As the wine worked its way through her, Laura's thoughts meandered back to the events that had led her here. The divorce had been a relentless storm, battering her from every angle. The arguments, the legal battles, the relentless sense of failure. It had all compounded into a sense of suffocating defeat. The meeting with her lawyer was supposed to be a glimmer of hope, a chance to reclaim some semblance of control, but now that hope was extinguished. Her gaze wandered to the cluttered coffee table, where a stack of unopened mail lay scattered. Among the bills and junk mail was a single envelope that seemed out of place. Its plain, unmarked exterior was incongruous with the chaos around it. Laura picked it up, her curiosity piqued despite her despondency. The envelope felt oddly heavy in her hand, and a sense of foreboding mixed with intrigue washed over her. With a hesitant breath, she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. Laura unfolded it and began to read, her eyes scanning the handwritten words. The message was cryptic, hinting at a hidden truth about her family, something she had never known. As she read, a flicker of something, perhaps hope or perhaps dread, began to stir within her. The chapter ends with Laura staring at the letter, her mind racing. The promise of a revelation, however vague, seemed to pierce through the fog of her despair. She clutched the letter tightly, the weight of its potential sinking in. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a spark of curiosity and determination ignited in her eyes. As she looked around her disheveled apartment, a new resolve began to form. The letter, with its tantalizing hints of hidden truths, might just be the key to unraveling the mess her life had become. The collapse of her world might be giving way to a new path, one she was barely beginning to see. Laura's apartment felt quieter now, the hum of the city outside muffled by the walls. The only sound was the rustling of the letter in her hand as she stared at it, the cryptic message slowly revealing itself under the dim light of the living room lamp. The flickering shadows danced across the walls, casting an eerie glow that matched the uncertainty gnawing at her. She sank into the armchair again, the letter's weight a stark contrast to the lightness she had hoped to find. As she read and reread the handwritten words, their meaning seemed to twist and turn, evading clear understanding. The letter spoke of a secret, buried deep in her family's past, suggesting that something pivotal was hidden away, something that could reshape her future. Laura's eyes drifted to the framed photographs on the mantelpiece. Each image, once a symbol of a happier past, now felt like a reminder of what she had lost. She picked up the photograph of her parents from their wedding day, their faces radiant with joy. Was there a hidden truth about them too, as the letter implied? Her heart raced with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. With a deep breath, she set the letter aside and reached for her phone. She needed answers, but where to start? Her fingers hovered over the screen as she debated calling her friend Mia, who had always been a confidant. Mia's calming presence might offer some clarity, even if she had little insight into family secrets. Reluctantly, Laura dialed Mia's number. The phone rang 3 times before Mia's cheerful voice answered. "Hey Laura, what's up?" Laura's voice was hesitant. "Mia, I need to show you something. Can you come over?" "Sure, what's going on?" Mia's curiosity was evident. Laura hesitated, then said, "It's something I found. It's important." "On my way," Mia replied, sensing the gravity in Laura's tone. Laura paced the small living room while she waited. The letter lay on the coffee table, its enigmatic words a constant lure. Her mind raced with possible scenarios, each more unsettling than the last. She wondered what the letter's true purpose was and why it had surfaced now, in the midst of her greatest turmoil. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Laura rushed to open it, and there stood Mia, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. Without a word, Laura led her into the living room, where the letter was prominently displayed. "What's this about?" Mia asked, her eyes fixed on the letter. Laura handed it over, watching as Mia's brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't fully understand it, but it hints at a family secret. It's like a puzzle I need to solve." Mia read the letter carefully, her expression shifting from confusion to intrigue. "This is definitely mysterious. It mentions something about a hidden truth. Do you think it could be real?" Laura shrugged, feeling the weight of uncertainty. "I don't know, but it's the only lead I have right now." Mia nodded thoughtfully. "If there's anything to this, we need to dig deeper. Let's see if we can find any connections to this secret. Maybe there's something in your family's past that we're not seeing." As they discussed the letter's implications, Laura's apprehension began to transform into a tentative hope. The idea of uncovering a hidden truth, however daunting, offered a glimmer of possibility in her otherwise bleak existence. The morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of Laura's apartment, casting streaks of pale gold across the cluttered floor. The quiet buzz of the city outside felt distant, almost surreal. Laura sat at the kitchen table, the mysterious letter spread out before her. A pot of coffee brewed slowly, filling the room with a comforting aroma that contrasted sharply with her mounting anxiety. Mia had left hours earlier, leaving Laura alone with her thoughts and the weight of the letter's secrets. Laura's eyes traced the handwritten words again, but they seemed to elude her understanding with every glance. The cryptic message spoke of a hidden truth tied to her family's past, but the details were maddeningly vague. Determined to make sense of it, Laura decided to start with what she knew. She dug through old family albums and dusty boxes in the attic, hoping to find anything that could connect to the letter's clues. Each photograph and memento was a fragment of her past, but none seemed to hold the key she was searching for. The attic was a dim, cramped space filled with the forgotten relics of her family's history. Laura's movements disturbed the dust, which floated in the shafts of light like tiny specters. She pulled out an old, leather-bound scrapbook that had belonged to her mother. With a mixture of nostalgia and frustration, she flipped through its pages, revealing yellowed clippings and faded photographs. One photograph caught her eye, a family gathering from years ago. Her parents stood smiling in the center, surrounded by relatives she barely remembered. Something about the way her mother was looking at a man standing slightly apart from the rest made Laura's pulse quicken. He was a distant uncle, long since estranged from the family, but why would he be mentioned in the letter? Laura's thoughts raced. Could this estranged uncle be connected to the hidden truth? She needed more information. She turned to her phone and began searching online for any details about this uncle. Hours slipped by as she sifted through articles and obituaries, trying to piece together a coherent picture. Her search yielded little until she stumbled upon an old news article about a legal dispute involving her uncle. The article mentioned a significant inheritance tied to a long-forgotten family estate. Laura's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the secret the letter hinted at? She took a deep breath and made a decision. She had to find out more about this inheritance and its connection to the family secret. Laura grabbed her coat and keys, determined to visit the local courthouse where the legal documents might be archived. As she walked through the bustling streets, her thoughts were a whirlwind of questions and half-formed theories. The courthouse loomed ahead, a grand building that seemed to embody the weight of bureaucracy and history. Laura stepped inside, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached the information desk. "Hi," Laura said to the clerk, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to access some old legal documents. Specifically, anything related to an inheritance dispute from about 20 years ago." The clerk's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'll need a bit more information to locate those records. Do you have a name or case number?" Laura hesitated, then mentioned her uncle's name and provided as much detail as she could. The clerk nodded and directed her to a room filled with rows of file cabinets and dusty folders. Laura's search in the courthouse was meticulous. She combed through the documents, each one a piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. After several hours, she finally found a folder labeled with her uncle's name and the case number she needed. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing a stack of legal papers, correspondence, and notes. One document stood out, a handwritten letter from her uncle to a lawyer, mentioning a family secret tied to a particular property. The letter hinted at a hidden clause in his will that could explain the enigmatic message Laura had received. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Laura's apartment as she pored over the documents she had retrieved from the courthouse. Her eyes flickered between the legal papers and her phone, a growing list of names and addresses scribbled on a notepad beside her. The discovery about her uncle's hidden inheritance had sparked a new sense of urgency and curiosity. Laura knew she needed to follow every lead, no matter how tenuous. Her first call was to Aunt Sylvia, her mother's sister, who had always been a wellspring of family gossip and half-remembered stories. Laura dialed the number and waited, her heart beating with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The phone rang twice before Sylvia's familiar voice answered. "Hello, Aunt Sylvia, it's Laura. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Laura? Of course not. What's going on?" Sylvia's tone was warm, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity. "I've come across something in old family documents," Laura began cautiously. "I was wondering if you could tell me more about a certain family dispute involving Uncle Robert." There was a pause on the other end, a soft rustle as Sylvia's curiosity was piqued. "Robert? That's a name I haven't heard in a while. What's this about?" Laura explained the basics of what she had found, the mention of a secret inheritance and its possible connection to the letter she received. Sylvia's response was slow, her voice tinged with hesitation. "I remember whispers about a legal battle, but I didn't know it involved anything hidden. Robert was always a bit of an enigma." Laura's eyes narrowed with determination. "Do you know anyone who might have more information?" Sylvia thought for a moment. "You should talk to Jonathan, Robert's old business partner. They had quite a fallout years ago. He might know more about the legal issues and Robert's secrets." Grateful for the lead, Laura thanked Sylvia and hung up. She quickly found Jonathan's contact details online and, after a brief search, dialed his number. The call went to voicemail, but Laura left a concise message, asking to meet and discuss some family matters. The next day, Laura arrived at Jonathan's office, a sleek, modern building that contrasted sharply with her own cluttered world. She was greeted by a young receptionist who directed her to a minimalist conference room. The space was filled with glass walls and sparse furniture, creating an atmosphere of sterile efficiency. Jonathan entered the room shortly after, his demeanor formal yet approachable. He shook Laura's hand with a practiced ease, his eyes assessing her with a mix of curiosity and guardedness. "Laura, right? I'm Jonathan. Sylvia mentioned you might have some questions about Robert." Laura nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, I've been digging into some old documents and came across references to a hidden inheritance and a family dispute involving Uncle Robert. I'm trying to piece together what happened." Jonathan's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. Robert was a complex man. He had his share of secrets and conflicts. I can tell you there was a significant legal battle over an estate he owned. But beyond that, most details were kept under wraps. Laura leaned forward, her interest piqued. What about the hidden inheritance? Did Robert leave anything unusual in his will? Jonathan sighed and sat back. Robert had a clause in his will that was never made public. It mentioned a family secret, but the details were never clear to me. The clause was likely meant to remain a mystery, or perhaps it was meant for someone who could unravel it. Laura's mind raced. This hidden clause seemed to be a critical piece of the puzzle. Do you know where I might find more about this clause or any documents related to it? Jonathan's gaze softened, and he seemed to weigh his response carefully. You might try reaching out to Robert's old attorney. He would have handled the will and might still have records. His name is Charles Edwards, and his office is downtown. Laura thanked Jonathan and left his office, the new lead adding another layer to her investigation. As she walked through the bustling city streets, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The connections she was making, though elusive, were drawing her closer to uncovering the full truth. Laura's fingers drummed impatiently on the armrest of the leather chair as she waited in Charles Edwards' office. The room was sleek, lined with bookshelves filled with dusty legal tomes, and the faint smell of polished wood lingered in the air. The ticking of a clock on the wall seemed to echo louder with every passing second. Charles Edwards entered, his demeanor calm and professional. He was a man of indeterminate age, with silver hair and a gaze that suggested he had seen many secrets in his time. He shook Laura's hand and gestured for her to sit. "Ms. Campbell, what can I do for you today?" His voice was even, but there was a glimmer of curiosity in his eyes. Laura took a deep breath. "I'm investigating an old family matter involving my late uncle, Robert Campbell. I found references to a hidden clause in his will that might contain important details about a family secret. I was hoping you could help me access any records related to this." Edward's expression remained neutral, but a brief flicker of something, recognition perhaps, crossed his face. "The clause you mentioned was indeed part of Robert's will. It was a private matter, and access to those documents is restricted. However, I might be able to provide some guidance." Laura leaned in, her determination evident. "I understand that it's a sensitive issue, but this information could be crucial for understanding my family's past. Can you at least point me in the right direction?" Edwards studied her for a moment before nodding. "I'll need to check the specifics of what can be disclosed. Meanwhile, there was a provision for a confidential contact. If you're persistent, you might find some answers through them." Laura's heart quickened. "Who is this contact?" "Robert's old associate, Eleanor Blackwood. She was the only one involved in that particular matter who might still be reachable," Edwards replied. "You'll need to approach her carefully. She's known to be quite reclusive." Laura thanked Edwards and left his office, her mind racing with the new lead. As she walked out into the cool breeze of the late afternoon, she felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Eleanor Blackwood, a name that seemed to hold the promise of answers and yet felt shrouded in mystery. The following day, Laura found herself outside a quaint, ivy-covered house in the suburbs. It was a stark contrast to the sleek office of Edwards, its charm tempered by an air of neglect. She rang the doorbell, her fingers trembling slightly. A woman in her late 60s answered the door. Eleanor Blackwood's gaze was sharp, and her posture exuded an air of cautious grace. She studied Laura with a penetrating look before stepping aside to let her in. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood," she said. "What brings you here?" Laura introduced herself and briefly explained her quest for information about her uncle's will and the hidden clause. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she listened, and she motioned for Laura to sit in a small, cozy parlor filled with antique furniture and the faint scent of old books. "I knew Robert well," Eleanor said, her voice steady but tinged with an edge of melancholy. "The details of his will were always meant to remain private. If you're here seeking answers, you should know that uncovering them might not be straightforward." Laura nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I understand. I'm looking for any information or documents that might help me understand the truth behind the clause." Eleanor's gaze softened slightly. Robert was a complicated man. He had his reasons for the secrecy. There were many layers to the issues he faced, and the clause was a reflection of that. I have some records that might help, but I need to be sure of your intentions. Laura spoke earnestly. I'm trying to piece together my family's history. I believe understanding this will help me find closure. Eleanor considered Laura's words for a moment before nodding. Very well. I'll show you what I have. Eleanor retrieved a box from a locked cabinet, placing it carefully on the table. Inside were old documents, photographs, and letters, all relating to Robert's legal and personal affairs. Laura's heart raced as she sifted through the materials, finding references to the hidden inheritance and vague hints about family secrets. One particular document caught Laura's eye, a letter written by Robert that seemed to address a specific person, but the name was smudged. Laura's pulse quickened as she realized it might hold the key to understanding the hidden clause and its implications. As Laura and Eleanor discussed the documents, a sense of revelation began to unfold. The fragments of Robert's past, combined with the newfound information, painted a picture of a family history fraught with conflict and hidden truths. Laura's apartment was dimly lit by the soft glow of a desk lamp, casting shadows that danced across the walls as she meticulously sorted through the documents Eleanor Blackwood had provided. The room was quiet except for the occasional rustle of paper and the steady hum of the refrigerator. Her coffee had gone cold, but she barely noticed, her focus fixed intently on the revelations before her. The letter with the smudged name was now fully decipherable. It was addressed to someone named Richard Campbell, a name Laura had not encountered before. The letter was filled with cryptic references to a hidden truth and the key to the legacy. Each word seemed to pulse with significance, and Laura's heart raced as she connected the dots. The clock on the wall ticked on, its rhythmic sound a stark contrast to Laura's quickened heartbeat. She cross-referenced the letter with the other documents, legal records, personal notes, and faded photographs. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, pointing toward a family secret that had been buried for decades. Laura's fingers traced over a faded photograph of a grand estate that she had found among the papers. The estate was beautiful, with sprawling gardens and an imposing facade. On the back, someone had scribbled a date and a brief note. The truth lies within. She needed more context. The next step was clear. Visit the estate. Laura prepared herself, pulling on a coat and grabbing the documents. The cool evening air greeted her as she stepped outside, a gentle reminder of the world continuing outside her personal quest. The drive to the estate was filled with a mix of anticipation and unease. The roads were lined with trees beginning to shed their autumn leaves, creating a tunnel of color that seemed almost surreal. As she neared the estate, its grandeur became more apparent, and a sense of awe mixed with apprehension settled over her. The estate was even more magnificent up close. It stood like a silent sentinel of the past, its tall iron gates slightly ajar as if inviting her in. Laura pushed open the gate and walked up the long, winding path to the entrance. The grandeur of the estate was overwhelming, with ivy climbing up the stone walls and the scent of old, rich wood hanging in the air. Laura hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The foyer was expansive, with high ceilings and large windows that let in the last rays of the setting sun. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden light, giving the room an ethereal quality. She walked carefully, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The house seemed frozen in time, with antique furniture and paintings of long-deceased family members watching over the space. Laura moved through the rooms with a mix of reverence and urgency, searching for anything that could reveal the estate's secrets. In the library, a room lined with dark wooden shelves and musty old books, Laura's eyes were drawn to a hidden compartment behind a row of volumes. With a bit of effort, she managed to pry it open, revealing a small, intricately carved box. Her hands trembled as she lifted the box, the weight of her discovery feeling both exhilarating and daunting. Inside the box was an assortment of old letters, a journal, and a key. The journal's leather cover was worn but intact, and as Laura opened it, she was greeted by her Uncle Robert's handwriting. The entries were candid, detailing a personal and emotional struggle that Robert had faced. a secret he had kept hidden from everyone. The journal revealed a story of a betrayal within the family, a financial scheme gone wrong, and a hidden inheritance meant to rectify the wrongs done by a family member. The key, Laura realized, was likely to a safe or hidden compartment within the estate itself. Her mind raced with the implications of these revelations. The truth was more complex than she had anticipated, involving deceit and long-buried conflicts. The estate had been both a symbol of the family's legacy and a repository of its darkest secrets. Laura's exploration led her to a small, concealed room in the basement of the estate. The key fit perfectly into an old, rusty lock, and as she opened the door, she was met with the sight of an old safe. Her hands shook as she turned the dial, the anticipation almost unbearable. Inside the safe were documents, photographs, and a final letter from Robert. The documents confirmed the existence of hidden assets and a legacy intended to correct past wrongs. The final letter addressed Laura directly, acknowledging the pain and confusion caused by the secrecy and expressing a hope that she would find the truth and make peace with it. As Laura stood in the dimly lit room, surrounded by the remnants of her family's history, she felt a profound mix of relief and sadness. The secrets that had been buried for so long were finally coming to light, but the emotional weight of the truth was heavy. The morning sun filtered through Laura's apartment windows, casting long, dappled shadows on the floor as she reviewed the documents from the estate. The weight of the previous night's discoveries was still heavy on her shoulders. Each page told a story of betrayal, hidden wealth, and unresolved family conflict. Her heart raced with the enormity of the decisions she now faced. Laura's phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Jonathan, the business partner who had once worked with Robert. "I think we need to talk," it read. The urgency in his message made her pause. She hadn't expected him to reach out again, but she knew she needed his perspective on the unfolding situation. The meeting was set for early afternoon at a small, quiet cafe near Jonathan's office. As Laura arrived, she noticed Jonathan already seated at a corner table, his face etched with concern. She approached and took a seat across from him, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. "I received your message," Laura began, trying to gauge Jonathan's mood. "What's on your mind?" Jonathan took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of resolve and apprehension. "I've been thinking a lot about what you discovered. Robert was a complicated man, and the secrets he kept were not just about money. There's a lot more to the story, things I didn't fully grasp until recently." Laura leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Jonathan looked around to ensure no one was listening. The hidden inheritance wasn't just a way to correct a financial wrong. It was tied to a family feud that involved more than just Robert and his immediate relatives. It's about a long-standing dispute over control and influence within the family. Laura's mind raced with the implications. "So what does this mean for me? How does it affect my decisions moving forward?" Jonathan's gaze was steady. "You have to be careful. There are people who might not want the truth to come out. And if you decide to pursue this further, you might find yourself in a difficult position." Laura nodded, absorbing the gravity of Jonathan's words. "I appreciate your honesty. I need to consider my next steps very carefully." As Laura left the cafe, her thoughts were a whirl of conflicting emotions. The sense of urgency she felt was now tinged with a new layer of risk. She had to confront the remaining figures involved in the family saga, people who might hold pieces of the puzzle or have their own stakes in the outcome. Her next visit was to Eleanor Blackwood's house, where she found Eleanor waiting with a somber expression. Laura had come with more questions, eager to understand the full extent of the family dispute. "I've learned that the issues go beyond what we initially thought," Laura said, her voice steady. "Jonathan mentioned a deeper conflict involving family control and influence. Can you shed more light on this?" Eleanor's expression softened, and she motioned for Laura to sit. The conflict was indeed more complex than it seemed. Robert's decision to hide the inheritance was his way of trying to correct the balance of power within the family. There were disagreements and manipulations that affected everyone involved. Eleanor reached into a drawer and pulled out a stack of old letters and documents. These might help you understand the broader context. They contain correspondences between Robert and various family members, revealing the undercurrents of power struggles and grievances. Laura sifted through the documents, her eyes widening as she read the exchanges. The letters painted a picture of a family divided by ambition and betrayal, each member vying for control and influence. The depth of the conflict was more intense than she had imagined, with personal and financial stakes intertwined. As Laura absorbed the information, she felt a growing sense of responsibility. She had the pieces of the puzzle but needed to decide how to use them. Should she reveal the truth, risking further discord and danger, or should she find a way to reconcile and heal the wounds of the past? Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from her lawyer, reminding her of the upcoming legal proceedings related to the inheritance. The timing could not have been more critical. She had to make decisions swiftly, balancing her newfound knowledge against the potential repercussions. As Laura prepared for the upcoming legal battle, she felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The truth she had uncovered could either mend or further fracture her family. She needed to navigate this delicate situation with care, ensuring that her decisions would lead to the best possible outcome. The early morning light spilled into the courtroom, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. Laura sat at the defense table, her fingers nervously tapping on the legal documents laid out before her. Today was the culmination of everything she had discovered, a pivotal moment that would determine the future of her family's legacy. The room buzzed with a low hum of conversation as attendees filed in. The judge, a stern-faced woman with a reputation for fairness, took her seat, and the proceedings began. Laura's lawyer, Charles Edwards, appeared composed and confident, yet Laura could sense the tension in his posture. He was well prepared, but the stakes were high. Across the room, Laura noticed several familiar faces. Jonathan sat in the back, his expression a mixture of concern and support. Eleanor Blackwood was also present, her face a mask of stoic curiosity. The weight of the revelations that had emerged from the documents was palpable, and Laura felt a pang of anxiety as she thought about how these revelations would impact everyone present. The courtroom doors opened, and the opposing counsel walked in, a sharp, efficient attorney representing the interests of various family members who had stakes in the inheritance. Laura recognized a few faces among the plaintiff's side, each marked by a blend of apprehension and determination. This was more than just a legal battle. It was a confrontation of past grievances and hidden truths. The proceedings began with opening statements. Charles addressed the court, laying out the evidence Laura had gathered and framing the case as one of rectifying past wrongs and bringing to light the truth of Robert's intentions. His voice was steady, and his arguments were compelling, but the complexity of the case meant that every word mattered. Laura watched as the evidence was presented, a mix of documents, letters, and testimonies. The courtroom was silent, save for the occasional rustle of paper and the soft clacking of keyboards as notes were taken. The tension in the room was thick, and Laura's mind raced with thoughts of the consequences that lay ahead. As the case progressed, the opposing counsel began presenting their arguments. They challenged the authenticity of some documents and questioned the motivations behind Robert's decisions. Their approach was aggressive, aiming to discredit Laura's findings and cast doubt on her credibility. Laura's heart sank as she listened to the counterarguments. She could see the strategy in play, casting uncertainty on the evidence to weaken her position. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, she felt a surge of determination. She knew that the truth was on her side, and she needed to stay focused and resolute. The courtroom drama reached its climax when Laura took the stand. Her hands were slightly trembling as she faced the room full of watchful eyes. She recounted her journey, her discoveries, her confrontations, and the impact the hidden inheritance had on her family. Her voice was steady, but her emotions were evident as she spoke about the personal toll the revelations had taken on her. Her testimony was heartfelt and powerful, and as she spoke, she noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The skepticism in the room seemed to wane, replaced by a growing understanding of the personal and emotional dimensions of the case. Her narrative resonated, highlighting the human aspects behind the legal struggle. As the day drew to a close, the judge announced a recess, giving everyone time to reflect on the arguments and evidence presented. Laura walked out of the courtroom, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The outcome was still uncertain, but she felt a cautious optimism. That evening, Laura and Charles met in a quiet cafe, away from the bustle of the courtroom. Charles reviewed the day's proceedings with a practiced eye, noting the positive reception of Laura's testimony and the weaknesses in the opposing counsel's arguments. "I think we made a strong case," Charles said, his tone reassuring. The judge seemed receptive to the evidence and the personal impact of the revelations. Laura nodded, though her anxiety was far from gone. "I hope so. It's been an emotional roller coaster, and I just want this to be resolved in a way that brings closure for everyone involved." Charles smiled gently. "We've done everything we can. Now it's up to the judge. Whatever happens, you've shown great courage in pursuing the truth." As Laura walked home that night, the city lights twinkled around her, casting a soft glow on the streets. The uncertainty of the upcoming decision hung heavy, but she felt a sense of peace knowing she had fought for what she believed was right. The days following the courtroom proceedings were filled with an oppressive silence, a stark contrast to the tension of the trial. Laura found herself struggling with an overwhelming sense of dread as she awaited the judge's decision. Her apartment felt like a cocoon, the walls pressing in as her thoughts spiraled into the abyss of uncertainty. One evening, Laura sat at her dining table, surrounded by scattered papers and empty coffee cups. The weight of the documents and the silence around her created a sense of isolation. She glanced at the clock. Time seemed to drag, each tick a reminder of the impending judgment. The comfort of her home now felt claustrophobic, each corner echoing her anxiety. Her phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Charles, his voice carrying an edge of concern. "Laura, we need to talk. Can you come to the office?" Laura's heart sank, but she nodded to herself, gathering her things and heading out into the chilly night air. The city lights blurred around her, the usual vibrancy diminished by the heavy fog of her thoughts. Charles's office was dimly lit when she arrived, the atmosphere tense and somber. Charles greeted her with a grave expression and motioned for her to sit. "Laura, there's been an unexpected development," he began, his tone somber. Laura's pulse quickened. "What's happened?" Charles took a deep breath. "I received a call from the court this afternoon. There's been an allegation of tampering with evidence, specifically some of the documents we presented. They've suspended the proceedings until the matter is resolved." Laura's stomach churned. "What does this mean for the case?" "It means the trial is on hold indefinitely," Charles explained. "We have to address the allegations and prove the integrity of our evidence. Until then, everything is in limbo." The news hit Laura like a punch to the gut. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her hopes and efforts now at risk. "How did this happen?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles's expression was pained. "It appears that someone on the other side might have planted doubts or manipulated evidence to discredit our case. We'll need to launch an investigation to clear this up." The weight of the situation pressed down on Laura, her mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and failure. She felt trapped, her efforts undermined by forces beyond her control. The certainty of her journey was now clouded by doubt and frustration. As Laura left the office, she wandered through the city streets aimlessly, the cold night air stinging her face. The once familiar landmarks of her daily life now seemed distant and unrecognizable. Her thoughts were a chaotic blend of fear, anger, and despair. She found herself at the edge of a quiet park, the darkness of the night mirroring her inner turmoil. She sat on a park bench, her gaze fixed on the distant city lights. The loneliness of the moment was suffocating, her emotions a turbulent sea of uncertainty. Minutes turned into hours as Laura sat there, lost in thought. The weight of her struggle seemed unbearable, and the future appeared bleak. The dark sky overhead felt like a shroud, covering her in a blanket of isolation and sorrow. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Eleanor. "I'm here for you. If you need to talk, call me." Laura stared at the message, a flicker of comfort in the midst of her despair. She hesitated but eventually dialed Eleanor's number. Eleanor's voice was warm and soothing as she answered. "Laura, what's going on?" Laura's voice cracked as she explained the latest setback and her feelings of hopelessness. Eleanor listened attentively, offering words of encouragement and support. "You're stronger than you think. This is a setback, but it doesn't define the end of your journey. Keep fighting for the truth." The conversation provided a small measure of solace, but Laura knew the road ahead would be challenging. She had to confront not only the external obstacles but also her own fears and doubts. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Laura stood up from the park bench. The night had been a time of reflection, but now she had to face the reality of her situation. The darkness was receding, and with it, a glimmer of resolve began to emerge. The early morning sun bathed the city in a soft, golden light as Laura woke up, the events of the past few weeks weighing heavily on her mind. The court case had been a relentless battle, but as she looked out her window at the tranquil scene below, a sense of calm began to settle over her. Her apartment, once a place of isolation and doubt, now felt like a sanctuary. Laura had spent the last few days regrouping, her spirit buoyed by the support of friends and the unwavering encouragement of Eleanor. The city outside, vibrant and alive, seemed to symbolize the possibility of a fresh start. Laura sat at her kitchen table, a cup of steaming coffee in hand. The envelope containing the judge's final decision lay on the table, its presence a constant reminder of the uncertain future. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up, her heart racing with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. As she carefully opened the envelope, the contents felt like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. The judge's decision, penned with precision and clarity, announced the dismissal of the tampering allegations. The evidence Laura had painstakingly gathered was deemed legitimate, and the court proceedings were to resume with renewed focus on the truth. A wave of relief washed over Laura as she read the verdict. The shadows of doubt and fear that had loomed so large seemed to dissolve in the light of this new development. She felt a surge of hope and determination, knowing that the road to justice was still open before her. Charles arrived at her apartment soon after, his face reflecting the same sense of relief. "Laura, this is fantastic news," he said, his tone full of genuine enthusiasm. "The court has cleared the way for us to move forward. It's a fresh opportunity to present your case without the cloud of allegations hanging over us." Laura smiled, feeling the weight of the past few weeks lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you, Charles. This means everything to me. I'm ready to continue fighting for what's right." With renewed resolve, Laura and Charles prepared for the next phase of the case. They met with their legal team, discussing strategies and reviewing evidence with a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead were still significant, but Laura now faced them with a fortified spirit and a clearer vision. As the days passed, Laura noticed a shift in her own outlook. The trauma of the past had given way to a sense of possibility and renewal. She began to re-engage with her life outside the legal battle, reconnecting with old friends and rediscovering the joy in everyday moments. One afternoon, Laura took a walk through the park where she had sat during her darkest moment. The park, now bathed in the vibrant colors of autumn, symbolized the change that had occurred in her life. She paused by the same bench where she had felt so lost, now reflecting on how far she had come. Eleanor joined her for a walk, their conversation light and filled with laughter. "You've really come through this stronger than ever," Eleanor said, her voice warm with admiration. "I always knew you had the strength to see this through." Laura nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without your support. It's been a journey of growth and self-discovery." As they walked, Laura felt a renewed sense of connection to the world around her. The city, once a backdrop to her struggle, now seemed like a landscape of new beginnings. The challenges ahead were still daunting, but Laura faced them with a newfound hope and determination. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Laura stood by her apartment window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle. The path she had traversed had been arduous, but it had led her to a place of hope and possibility. Click on the video being recommended to you now.